Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Parenting is Easy podcast, where we will discuss the pleasures and the frustrations, the good and the bad, and the rewarding and the troubling aspects of parenting. I am your host, Chananya Abraham, and I'm a psychotherapist that specializes in working with teenagers, young adults, and parents with a specific niche in assisting with communication within the family dynamics. While everyone has their own unique journey and experiences as a parent and as a child, there are many common affiliations and attributes that we can all relate to and share. Together, we will learn from personal stories and experiences from parents across many different backgrounds, cultures, and communities. So get comfortable, grab your glass of coffee, and let's get right into the interview. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Parenting is Easy, said no one ever. I am your host, Chananya Abraham, and I have a very, very exciting guest for today, someone that we've been in contact for months, probably the longest I've been in contact with someone until we actually are here having this face-to-face, digital face-to-face conversation. Reena Friedman Watts, who is the host of a podcast that I've learned so much from that we're going to actually be posting in the show notes, we're going to hear about today. Just Call Daddy.
Better Call Daddy.
I'm sorry about that. And you know, as a person that has really been through the ringer when it comes to starting a family, having a relationship with kids, moving from different locations. We're going to get all into that right now. Without further ado, Reena, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yay! Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I want to, there's so many different parts of things that I've learned from you that I really want to talk about. But can you give us a little bit of a background of where you've come from? I know you're Kentucky gal, and how you sort of got into the showbiz and your podcasting. How you sort of has started that journey.
It has been quite a journey, 20 years in the making and longer.
Yeah.
I got my start at a radio station in college at WBAA in West Lafayette, Indiana. And I worked at an NPR station for a couple of years. And then I drove up to Chicago and had an interview at WGN, which I got from the Career Services office at Purdue. And I really wanted to work in radio. I love the medium, but there wasn't an opportunity, or that opportunity didn't come to fruition. But while I was up there on that trip, I saw that Jerry Springer was looking for interns.
Wow. At that time, was he already a household name, or is this something that he was like just starting at? He was a household name. So, okay. So I think that's a very good point to sort of start with over here. You talk about like sort of chances happening and like you get into place, and you were intern there for, how was it, like 2 years?
I actually interned for a couple of months. I went from intern to associate producer in a very short period. I was lucky. It was
Wow.
timing and opportunity and me working around the clock to climb the ladder.
Okay. So that's my first question when we talk about parenting over here on this podcast. When you talk about opportunity, when you talk about sort of seeing things, like, oh, okay, so this is not going to work out. Let me try this. And that's where your career really jumpstarts. How have you seen that when it comes to you being a parent, and in general, the concept of parenting when it comes to having to take what you have? What do you see as how that correlates?
I am constantly looking for opportunities for my kids. Like, I saw a podcaster was looking for a couple of high schoolers to start a podcast, and he was literally willing to sponsor their gear, their editing, their marketing. And I'm like, tried to twist my high schooler's arm into doing it, but he had other interests. He would rather do basketball. He would rather work out. And I was like, but this is such a good opportunity. I'm like, oh my God, I would love this opportunity. He's willing to pay you to do this and work alongside you. And I couldn't talk him into it. So I tried something else. I took my daughter to an ice skating birthday party, and then the owner of the ice skating rink was in the front and checking people in, and the place was packed. And I was like, hey, are you hiring? You guys look really busy. And she was like, in the summer I am. And I was like, oh, cool. Let me get your number, because it's very hard for 15-year-olds to get hired. Most places only hire 16-year-olds. And I know that from trying to get him a job last summer. So I connected with the owner of the joint, and he did end up working there for a short time. But again, basketball season rolled around, and that was his priority. So I'm constantly looking for opportunities and ways I can like connect my kids But ultimately, they have their own choices and their own personalities, and they're gonna do what interests them.
And where have you picked it up in the thing, your career of, and it's more than just being on a Jerry Springer show and other places that you've worked as well, of having to find right opportunities. So in what other places in your career have you seen where, all right, let me try this angle, let me try doing this, and let me see how I can get a story here. And then how that sort of with your kids of also knowing how to have situations where, okay, I need to get involved here, but not get involved over here, to sort of taking a step back, not push over here. Where have you seen those type of, I guess you say, similar situations?
Well, even in my court TV days, I first interviewed for a post-production supervisor on Judge Alex. They flew me from LA to Houston, actually, and I had already been a post-production supervisor on other productions at the time. But a post-production supervisor on one show can mean something totally different than on another show. Some post-production supervisors just supervise the edits, and they do a lot of coordination work. They deal with studio executives, they supervise, like, the voiceover sessions, the audio mixing, that kinda thing. But on the show on Judge Alex, they actually wanted me to edit, and at the time, I wasn't pushing the buttons. And so they flew me out to Houston, gave me a tape, and were like, "How would you cut this together?" And they gave me a remote control and a TV, and it was like stopping and starting and trying to give them time codes of how I would cut together a raw episode. I was like, "I totally did not get this job." But what's interesting is I kept in touch with someone who worked on the show, and then when they got a new executive in charge and we moved cities for one of my husband's opportunities, they were looking for a researcher in multiple locations, and I was like, "Oh, man, well, Kentucky's a gold mine, Indiana's a gold mine, Chicago's a gold mine." So in those cities that we lived, I ended up being a researcher on Judge Alex for 5 seasons, and then that led to me working on Divorce Court and Hot Bench and multiple casting opportunities from figuring out another way in which I might be able to work on that show.
Wow. Okay. So it's so many things to unpack over there. I guess the first thing I want to see, like, pick your brain a little bit. So there you are, married, and are you at that point with a family when when you take this job as a researcher, going around to different places?
Yes, and this is also kind of comical because I was at one point literally nursing a kid in the car, dropping them at a babysitter for 4 hours, going to the courthouse, scanning the cases,
Oh
and
my God.
picking my kid up and nursing them again in the car when I picked them up. I had like a 4-hour window when one of my
Wow.
kids was like 4 months old. I still wanted once I started working again with my first kid, I didn't really work for the first couple of years. With my second kid, I was like, "I gotta figure out how to do both of these things because I'm gonna go nuts." And same thing with the 3rd kid. So, yeah,
Wow.
I was balancing being a mom and doing what I loved and not making as much money as I once had.
Wow. But at the same time, I think all moms that are in situations like that, I think, are the master jugglers of figuring things out constantly. And then there you are, you're also researching divorce courting, and different situations that come up there. What type of impact did that have on your relationship when you hear and see certain things? I could talk about my field and in the world of psychology, and obviously there are things that come about as a parent, as a spouse, that I could say, "Oh wow, thank God I have this," or that's something maybe I should be considerate about when it comes to my relationship. So, what were you able to take? I guess you could say from your professional life to your real life when it came to things that you experienced and how to implement it or use them in some way in your own relationship.
That is such a great question, and there are many answers I could give to that. A lot just came up for me there. One, when I was casting Divorce Court, I literally had one of my babies strapped to me in a Bjorn, and I was standing outside of people filing for divorce and handing out flyers like, "Do you wanna be on Divorce Court?" I had people coming up to me like, "Are you divorced?" It was so funny. So then I'd, like, switched my pitch. I'm like, "Hey, you know what? You wanna be on TV?" Who doesn't wanna be on TV, right? So instead of being like, "Are you filing for divorce?" Like, it was more of, "Wanna be on TV. I'm casting for a show."
Wow. Wow. Wow.
So that
Okay.
was
Yeah.
kind of funny, but also I worked on Nanny 911 for 3 seasons, pretty much from pilot through the end of that taping. And I was a post-production supervisor on that show, so I am watching hundreds of hours of footage of people that have out of control children and what the nannies would do to remedy the situation. And let me tell you, I obviously learned nothing because I couldn't even toilet train my own child until he was 4 years old. I saw
Okay,
him going to the
so
same spot to poop
I
for 4 years.
okay. So I wanna say this, and I think it's very important when it comes to and there's so much research about behind this, Rena. When it comes to potty training, it has so much to do with the child themselves that you could have gone to school to become the ultimate potty trainer, and it would not have made a difference when it came to what it is that your child needed in that moment. So don't be too hard on yourself when it comes to your child being 4 years old, and it's in developmentally, if the muscles and the brain is not ready for it, they're not going to be ready for it. And just because they have that spot in their house, the same way some people's might have with some animals, doesn't necessarily mean that okay. So then, why come they're not doing this right now? I could speak from personal experience. I would say potty training is probably the hardest and most stressful thing as as there is when it comes to parenting, at least at this point. And my kids are I still on the younger side, and my oldest is 16, and we're just having the first conversation regarding driving a car, which I'm sure will be very stressful when that actually happens. But at the same time, potty training is something that is so personal, and it's so difficult to go ahead and say that, like, I wish I did have done a better job because so many things that come into play. But I just had to say that, throw it in there. But if you can think of all those things that you did on that show specifically, I mean, there's got to be a plethora of different things that you could say you learned from. But if you could pick like top two or three things that you could say you were able to take from that, from being involved in that show, but yet also being a parent at the same time, what would be like some of the biggest things that you learned from that show personally as a parent?
Well, that was pre-parenting,
Oh, okay.
but I did call the nanny after I couldn't toilet train my kid, and she was like, "You are gonna have to do some tough love here." And what I did learn, though, is the reward thing really worked, where he was obsessed with Thomas the Train, and I went and bought the whole Tidmouth sheds. I was like, "Look, if you go poop on the toilet right now, I know you need to because 'cause you're in your spot. I will give you the whole Tidmouth sheds." And I had the Tidmouth sheds in my hands when I made the offer. And he wanted that thing so bad that he got on the toilet, and I was like, "You can have this, but you're not getting it," and he was in tears too. So
Wow.
and then I started rewarding him with each time he did it with a train. I mean, I was spending some money here, but that
Worth
that
it.
was one thing. It worked. That worked.
Yeah.
So I think that was, like, appropriate bribery. Um, Another show that I worked on that really, I feel like, made I guess just an impact on me was this documentary that I worked on, and it was right down the street from where I grew up in Kentucky. It was a whole high school full of pregnant teens. And what was interesting about that was some of the best parts of their stories couldn't be shared because they didn't have a parent that would sign off on their stories. A lot of them were from foster care or broken homes where parents weren't involved in their life. And I guess how I applied that to my own life was, if my kids have grown out of wanting to be interested in what I'm doing, I do think that they should have a say so in whether they're a part of my content or whether they want to be in an intro or whether they want to come hang out with me and my husband and do what we think is fun, right? So again, from my own upbringing, I feel like I was forced to do a lot of activities that my mom wanted me in. And when my kids show disinterest in things that we're interested in or in activities that I would want them to do, I feel like I don't push as hard to make them do things that
You bring up a very good point. And I actually, this past Friday night dinner, this came about with a conversation that my daughter had a great question to me, asking me like, you went through certain things in school regarding dress code that you've talked about, and you're so into with your with my second son, with my oldest son, with Matthew, of telling him that you don't have to wear things that you may not want to wear, and that's okay. And my daughter asked, "Well, don't you think that the traumas that you went through is affecting the way you're trying to be very, very lax with him? I thought that was an amazing question, and I was so happy that my daughter felt comfortable to say that over by the meal in front of everyone. And I love the question, and I think she's right. And I think that things that we experience has so much to do with how we are going to want our child to experience certain things. And I think it's important for us to remember that our child is different than us, and just because we experience something doesn't mean our child is going to experience that same thing. Therefore, we have to be open to them having an experience that is right for them. And it doesn't mean that because I didn't like doing certain things, that he's not going to like doing certain things. And I shouldn't be, the way I like saying it is, we shouldn't be parenting vicariously through the life that we want to have, but we should be parenting for the life that they need to have, our children, which I think is a very, very big thing. And just to comment one more thing we were just saying before regarding the train and like, is seeing what can work. One of the things just to point out for people that are going through similar type of situations regarding potty training, and I'm probably going to be going through that very, very soon with my youngest, is when you have an incentive, which can work. And I think when it comes to positive reinforcement, is the visualization of what you did. So you having it there and saying, you see this thing that you really, really, really want, it's yours. All you need to do is go poop on the toilet. And by you doing that, this is yours. Not that I will go get you something. It's here. This thing right now, this is yours. So, I know a lot of parents have talked about having, freshly baked cookies or jelly beans and saying every time you go potty, every time you go make on the toilet, you get to pick 2, 3 colors. You get to pick any one of these cookies. So it sort of creates a world where that thing that you should be doing, this thing right here is yours and no one else's. You have no other siblings that are allowed to touch these jelly beans. These cookies are just for you every time you go make for the first couple of weeks as they're getting the muscles used to it. I think that's so key for how to go about things and having that incentive right there in front of them and making that so important. Another important thing that I think I haven't really talked about in this podcast, but I think is a very important point is creating opportunities and situations where a child has things that belong to them and them only. And, that concept of being able to say, see these jelly beans? Yes, I know you have 3 older siblings, but they're not allowed to take from this, even though they make on the toilet, no problem. I don't have to tell them to go make on the toilet, even though there are things that they're struggling with and they have to do well, but it does make a difference. This is yours, and they're for you to take when you do the thing that you're being tasked to do. And it's hard. I know it's hard, but you have nothing to worry about. No one is going to touch any of these. And I think that's a very, very good point. You talk about Thomas the Train. For all I know, maybe your other kids don't like Thomas the Train. And it makes it that thing that you got is for them. People do something similar when it comes to getting rid of the pacifier. I know dentists, and I've interviewed one recently saying after 18 months, make sure there's no more pacifier. Let's be honest, it's the best mute button there is out there. And most of us parents are not getting rid of it at 18 months. So, however, whatever age is the right age for you. And I see what people do is they'll take a kid to a toy store and they'll say, pick something. And when you get rid of the pacifier, you put it in the garbage. Now that toy is yours. So you put it on their shelf, put it there and say, that's yours. You can open it. You have to take this and you have to go put it in the garbage. So you're giving them the authority to say, this thing, garbage now. And that could go a very long way when you have the visualization of something that you're trying to incentivize them with, especially when they're really young, and then also giving them the autonomy of how to work on it. You throw this out, you go make here. So it creates a behavioral change within them. And the more the body has to move in a way where doing the thing that you want them to do, the more custom and easier it'll be for them to go ahead and do that. Obviously, being in court and seeing people filing things for divorce, which could be pretty intense, and it can really have such an impact on self. I'm curious, like, how were you able to divide that tension that was there in that courtroom, or let's say you're doing well with the nanny and seeing certain things and having an impact on you, and then you coming home and having to be a mom and a spouse? How were you able to juggle that?
That's a great question. Well, at the time that I was working on Nanny, it was before I had had kids, but
Okay.
I did think about, would I be able to produce the Jerry Springer show and be a mother? And I also thought about, would I be able to live in Hollywood and work in reality TV and be a mom? I look at some of my friends that have done that, And I'm like, how do they do that? One, the number of hours that we used to work, it was you were living and breathing the job, but two, just you are what you surround yourself by. And the number of failed relationships that I saw in Hollywood and in Jerry Springer, I mean, you start to think that that is everyone. And you're like, does anybody have healthy relationships? I said that to myself. And so after hearing 1,500 calls a week of people cheating on their spouses, and then you see that happening in the office too, you're like, is this sustainable long term? I'm smoking 2 packs of cigarettes a day. I think I need to work on something a little bit more redeeming.
So talk about healthy outlets. So I'm curious, with all of the 100-hour weeks that you've worked, and I'm sure you've worked plenty of those. I'm curious, how does a mom like you in your situation go about taking care and taking time for yourself and just doing things that you need to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. It can look a lot of different ways. One, I do feel like podcasting has been therapy for me because I can reach out to people who I admire their work, like you, and I learned a lot from your podcast. I
Thank
can
you.
reach out to authors who I've read their books and found inspirational. I can reach out to comedians who make me laugh. And by having a platform, you can have conversations with people that can give you bits of wisdom. So not only do I get to share my dad's bits of wisdom, but they up my wisdom rating as well. So podcasting has been self care for me, also an extended long hot shower, buying myself some makeup that I probably splurge just as much on my daughter's makeup, going for a drive and listening to music or a podcast. I think that self-care is truthfully key to a happy marriage.
Yeah, and I'm taking what you said, so you comment that I'm taking this the wrong way, but there's self-care for self, and then there's self-care for the relationship with your spouse. Two separate things. Can you please comment on how you go about doing that?
That's an interesting differentiation. So, I gave you a few examples of self-care for me, but self-care with my husband, I mean, we did date night for 7 years and we picked different things to do. We took improv at Second City in Chicago for a couple of years, and without even the plans of getting on stage, we just did it to because we love comedy and we wanted to learn more about each other and we wanted to get in a room with people half our age and play the parents. I'm just joking, but that's what happened. Um, we did CrossFit together for a couple of years. We hired a personal trainer. Oh, the reason we had to do CrossFit and get a personal trainer was because before that, we decided to check out all of the restaurants that we could eat at in town. So we did that for a few years and then we needed to work out after. But yeah, we did date night for 7 years. Then I had a kid at 39 when all of our kids were toilet trained and in school and we had balance in our life. And I was making good money as an entrepreneur. Then we decided to mix things up and have a baby 7 weeks early, a preemie, and become parents again in our 40s.
Wow. Yes. So I that's taking care of yourself. Now, regarding today, and being a parent and being able to go ahead and have the self care for you and your husband together. What do you guys do, and what do you recommend making sure that you take care of yourselves so that you can be good parents?
I try to play along whenever my husband picks out an adventure that he wants to do, i.e., we are driving to Florida. We've also driven to Austin and San Antonio and Dallas and checked out the other major cities near us. I let him pick out the Airbnb because he likes to do that and he's good at it, and I don't mind him managing it. He might give me a couple of options, but I feel like that's creative and self-care for him. Or, if there's a musician that he wants to go check out, and it might not necessarily be a band that I listen to or music that I'm into, I try to be open to those things. Or if there's a comedian coming to a synagogue nearby, near us, that I try to be open to these things because I know that he's trying to provide entertainment and spice to our life, and if I'm not picking out the opportunities, and I try to be excited about the ones that he finds.
That's beautiful, and I think that keeping that open mind, that non-judgmental mind, is important, and staying curious, like the words that we've been talking about. but that's things that you're allowing him to do. But how about for you? Because you're a just as important ingredient to the recipe of a marriage that as he is. So what do you bring to the table, and what can you do as a mom that has so many roles and doing so many things that is also important to say, hey, I want to do this for us, and I'm going to take charge over here. What would you do in certain
I hired
situations?
a cleaning lady.
Oh,
That's one, right? So I do feel like that is self-care for both of us because neither one of us enjoy doing the dishes the day after typing up a report for a sick child. What else have I organized? Even, what are we gonna do for upcoming vacations? So making suggestions there. Um, I feel like our biggest thing that we enjoy together is really comedy, so I suggest that a lot. One, we've done the improv together, but there's lots of different comedy clubs around not just our city, but surrounding cities. So I might reach out to, you know, a mother-in-law and be like, "Hey, can you watch the kids for a night and we'll go get a hotel in a city 3 hours away?" I've even reached out to influencers who my husband really looks up to, and I had one of them call and wish him a happy birthday. I felt pretty proud of my social media ability in being able to do that. I feel like that's one of the best birthday presents I've ever been able to pull off, is that there is this guy, Eric Weinstein, and before he was on Rogan and before he blew up on Twitter, I was able to reach him, and he called and sang my husband happy birthday, and it was funny because my husband thought that he was a rabbi, and when he told him who it was, I mean, he just was so shocked and surprised, and the kids didn't give up my secret, and it was honestly such a beautiful, wonderful moment, and I hope I can do more things like that with my influence.
that's awesome. That is, I love that idea. I think just the spontaneity, but also that obviously that you're saying, like, having to know the social media world enough to know who to reach out to and how to go about doing it, and your kids being in on it and being a part of it. That's awesome. That is really good. And I think what I'm hearing you say, Rena, is trying to make your husband happy. And I think when you're in a relationship, that it's more than just for a business relationship. It's for long term, and there are multiple reasons why we might be together when we're doing things for the other person. In a way, that is the self-care aspect that you're talking about up here. And I think something that all of us, whether we're running this podcast, listening to this podcast, or a parent in some way, shape, or form, when we're in it with our partner in a way where we're wanting to do for them, for us, I think that's one of the ultimate forms of having the healthiest relationship out there. Switching gears here a little bit, and I think one of the things that you've talked about in the producing world is obviously storytelling, and I think storytelling is obviously a big part of the work that is done in show business. I'm curious, when we talk about storytelling and the importance of it and how it keeps people captivated. What Where is that in the world of parenting, and how can you see that being something that you've either tried to do or would like to do more of when it comes to parenting?
Well, storytelling is what's happening in your life that other people can relate to that is unique to your path. And a story that just came up was like when I was pregnant with my first kid, I was transcribing footage for a documentary inside the Soledad prison. And I was listening to murderers tell their stories. And my husband's like, I really hope that that does not like influence the baby in utero. He was like concerned about the work that I was doing as I'm bringing this innocent soul into the world. So that's storytelling right there, but that is completely unique to our journey. And I think what is going to differentiate podcasters, radio hosts, people in TV are these types of stories that only you have experienced. And what makes me unique, even, there's a documentary, like, there's many documentary companies that have approached me about my time on Springer because he recently passed away. And what makes me unique, there's been hundreds of people that have worked on that show, but I am one of the only people that was podcasting at the time and got an hour-long interview with him. I'm also, it was my first job out of college. I was a Jew from Kentucky. My dad, had people at his factory that were on the show. Nobody else has my unique story or your unique story or anyone's unique story. And if the more details you can get and the more that people can relate because you're talking about general things that other people experience, that breaks through the noise. Part of my radio journey, I only did it for 9 months this past year, but they wanted me to be that mompreneur. Talk about what are the funny things that your kids talk to you about throughout the day. So, one thing I was doing for some of my bits where my 10-year-old asked me the funniest questions. So, some of the questions that he asked me, I would then ask my audience. And I use some of those prompts too. And on Twitter, even in preparing for this interview, I reached out to people in my Facebook group, on my own personal Facebook page, on my Twitter followers. I told them that I'm meeting with a psychotherapist today. Is there any challenges they're having with their own children? And I got feedback from all of the people who follow me on all of those different channels. And that is what is going to make your podcast unique. That is what makes storytelling unique is the people that are in your sphere, that are in your tribe. What are you guys experiencing? And you should
And I,
talk about those things and specifics. The more specific and the more details that you can give, it makes it interesting.
right. And I think in parenting, when we create that identity of self and we're telling our children, hey, this is our story. And not just regarding who I am, but regarding who you are. And this is your unique story. I think that goes really far, which also be really hard as a parent because a lot of times you're like, we want them to continue to have the same last name as us, but they might not always have the same last name as us because they might go to other places. And it doesn't mean they don't take the story with them. And I think when we are looking to be a parent and a successful parent, whatever that means, I'm still trying to figure that part out. But I think the concept is really okay, what am I giving this kid for what they need? And being able to tell for them to tell their story from their point of view. And my 10-year-old is going to say it very different than my 16-year-old. And that's okay because a 16-year-old has a certain point of view and has been through certain things that my 10-year-old will never be through and that's okay. And when we're looking to tell that story, and I think the biggest thing that I'm taking out from what you just said over here, staying curious and staying subjective to what I'm supposed to be doing right now. Of course, there's going to be a biased part to it, and we're going to be able to share our own unique version of it. Right? It's like everyone has their own apple pie recipe. It doesn't make my apple pie recipe better, but it's our apple pie recipe, and that's awesome because that's the one that we grew up with. That's been passed down. These chocolate chip cookies are the best because it came from grandma. Does that mean they're going to win the a world award? No, but they're going to win our award because they're from grandma, and they're passed down to us. And that's what I think. What our job is as parents is to be able to go ahead and say that, and that we're doing a job in a way where what our right now we're doing what is right for us, and we're telling over the story of us, and we're creating that, and we're whether it's on vacation, whether it's on a random Tuesday night, or whether it's the first day of school. And going through all those type of situations, what type of story are we creating with our kids? Are we trying to tell them so that they can pass on to their kids in the right time? Which I think what you're saying, and it sounds like there's so many things when it comes to the productivity of things, of the production behind the scenes that I think there are so many valuable lessons. But switching gears over here a little bit, you've been fortunate enough to have a podcast with your dad, and it sounds like it's something, and you could hear it in your voice when you're asking questions to him and you're talking to him of having a certain connection. I'm curious if you would be like two or three things that you could say have been the biggest takeaways for you of having a podcast with your dad and being able to share so many amazing moments with him. Are there certain things you could say you look back at it right now, and hopefully you still have a 300 plus more in you guys that you guys continue to put out? But are there things that up until this point you could say, this is something that really has stood out to me for having had this opportunity of having my father on my podcast with me?
That's really sweet. It's funny because he's visiting his mom right now. And every time he goes and visits his mom, he's like, "Hey, send me that episode of you interviewing my mom." And I have to say that I am so glad I did that episode a couple of years ago because I don't think that she could tell her story in the same way that she did then. And I think that it's really important to know where you come from and to get those stories. And we're now in an age where we can so easily record that. So if you have a parent or a grandparent or a mentor or an aunt or a friend that you would like to capture a story with, I would say do that. I think that that is a huge takeaway from this project. I'm doing a project with my dad in my 40s. I mean, how freaking awesome is that? And how many times do people even do a project with their parents in their older years? I think that that has been a huge takeaway. And my other takeaway is that my dad always encouraged me that if there was something that I wanted to do, I could do it. And I really want to carry that on to my own kids. And I also try to really teach my kids that a no is not really a no always, and that you either didn't ask in a creative way or maybe time will change that no. No is like an opportunity for a reframe. And
Mm.
actually, when my kids are able to change a no into a yes, they love letting me know that they've done that.
Okay, that's awesome. I'm so happy you said that. I actually have it written down in my notes for today. Is can you talk about changing a no into a yes, which I know is something that you're so
What?
big
That's
on.
funny.
Yes, I literally have those words written down. Turning a no into a yes. So can you talk about that? And hopefully my 16-year-old won't listen to this right now because I'm still on the no category of her getting a license. But if she hears this, I might have to change it to a yes. But I would love to hear how what that means. What is that concept of turning a no into a yes?
Well, my first time I heard that was when I auditioned for a youth performing arts school that I really wanted to go to. And the reason I wanted to go there was not only because I love to sing and I love music, that is part of it. Those are definitely my people. I love musicians. I was bullied when I went from a private Jewish school to public school, which I begged to go to because there weren't very many girls in my class. I wanted more friends. But when I went to that public school, it was major shock value. And kids were doing things that I didn't know what they were doing. And I was bullied, and there was this one girl that, like, I did not like her brother, and she was out for me, where she chased me home from school, and I wanted to go to that youth performing arts school to escape her. And when I didn't get in, when I didn't read all of the fine print of having to be able to sight read music and sing in an Italian aria or in a foreign language, and I ended up getting rejected the first time around, and then my dad went to the head of the music department and said, "What does my daughter have to do to get in?" And my dad had, like, such spunk and character. I mean, you've listened to him on the show. He's a total character, and I don't know, he won this guy over, and I don't think he made exceptions normally, but he probably saw, like, how bad I wanted it, and he said, "Here's the teacher that kids from the school study with, and if you take lessons from her over the summer and you learn an art song and you learn how to sight read music, you can re-audition." So I swallowed my pride and I studied with this teacher all summer long, and I walked back in there because my dad got me another shot, and I re-auditioned and he let me in. The thing is, though, is that I never felt like I got in because I was rejected the first time. And so something in me kind
Mm.
of was crushed from that first rejection. Like my happy go luckiness was kind of taken away, and I never sang out. I just wanted to blend. I wanted to be a part of singing with these kids that got in on their first try. I never even let people know that I didn't get in. And for 4 years, I stuck with the program because my dad got me in and he was the best teacher in the state. And he was, it was a well known program. And yeah, going to that school taught me how to complete things and how to work for something that you really want. And it was such a hard program. I wanted to quit every day that when I got a singing scholarship to a small school, the University of Charleston in West Virginia, and it wasn't the same amount of challenge and it wasn't as hard, I ended up transferring to Purdue because I wanted bigger and better.
Wow. So there's a lot of things to unpack over there, but I'm curious if you look back at it now, and let's say this concept of turning a no into a yes. Do you think that life lesson would be something that you'd be able to talking about if you got in on your first try?
That's a good question. I don't know. Right. I guess I needed to learn that lesson. And I've seen it play out with my own kid, my oldest, who's a lot like me. He, during our move, we had to move twice a year ago. And he has a very strict English teacher that never lets you make up. Like he has a set day that he does these assignments. And my son was so tired from helping his dad move furniture that he fell asleep and forgot to do it and missed the deadline. And he had just gotten over COVID. There was like a lot going on. And I was just like, look, this is a out there scenario. This is not going to happen again. Like we had to move 4 months after we just moved. We were like in an infested home, and I like went to bat with this teacher that never makes an exception. And I was like, look, you know, I see my son in you. Like, you're both very stiff-necked people. You know what I mean? Like, have some compassion. And I spelled out everything that we had gone through that was just like out there scenario. And yeah, my son could not, one, I think he was proud of me for like going to bat for him because I don't do it that much. And two, that I turned that no into a yes. Like, he'll never forget that.
I'm
I don't think
sure.
he's
I'm
seen
sure.
that teacher be lenient with anyone else in the last 2 years of switching that assignment date.
But I think it's also more what mom did. And that goes really, really, really far. Like, hey, mom's got my back. That's like really awesome. And I wonder if that also connects to something else you were just saying before, is that you had to swallow your pride and like put your head down and do certain things that you didn't have to do before. I'm curious how that lesson itself of having to swallow your pride, how has that shown itself in parenting for you over the past, I guess you could say, was it about 16 years of being a parent? Is it more than that at this point?
It's a little longer than that. Uh, God, parenting is swallowing your pride on so many things. I think the biggest way I swallow my pride is not forcing my kids to do activities, like a zillion of them. I was in modeling and I was in swimming and I was in singing and piano and gymnastics and you name it. I was schlepped all over the place. I'm like, these kids are like in school from, I mean, if I got them there on time, they'd be there from 7:30 to 4. I get them there more, before 9. And that's another thing I got from my dad is like, there were so many times growing up where my dad's like, run right in, they might not mark you late. I find myself saying the same thing. And it doesn't make that big of a deal either. You can still be successful and be late. I don't buy into that being there on time and staying in line and being sheep culture. I That is one thing that I have very much loosened up on. And the uniform thing too. My daughter was wearing zip up boots in kindergarten and they were like, "She can't wear zip up boots." I'm like, "She's in kindergarten. She picked those out. Trust me, she's not turning anybody on with those." You know what I mean? Um, so how has that presented itself? Is that where we were?
Yeah, the swallowing the pride aspect. I think that,
Swallowing the
that's literally
pride
it.
is, putting up with rules that I don't agree with. There's a lot of that.
Oh
A
yeah,
a lot of
yeah.
putting up with rules that I don't agree with, and a lot of bending to having balance with my kids.
How much has COVID had of an impact on what you just said?
It definitely did, because I saw all kinds of inconsistencies with information in the news, and ultimately what it boils down to is the happiness of your own home and what works for your family. That's the most important thing,
Creating your
and
own
that's
story.
creating your own story, and that's the only thing that you can ultimately change. I mean, we all wanna make a bigger difference. Every podcaster is hoping to be a light into the world and to create a platform of spreading good, but it all starts with the relationships that you have. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think when you have a partner, when you have a world around you that is able to be supportive of that and be on the same page, that goes a long ways. And that's where that self-care for self and within the relationship and creating that story. There's so much information out there, but I think it's about, taking the lessons and saying, you know what, right now for the next, like you were saying, the COVID had such an impact. I think when we realize that, hey, whatever happens within these walls within the house over this lockdown, that's really what's going to make or break us, and that's what ended up happening. It's sort of like, okay, there's so many new things that are coming about through this lockdown and just not being out in society, not being out in school. That let's hone in and let's do the things that we need to do for us. And okay, so she's wearing a pair of boots that who cares? Like, seriously, that's what you're going to complain about right now? Like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, the kid is in school, not kicking and screaming. They're happy to be here right now. Like, look at that. Look at what she can do, not what she can do. Well, what she can't do. I had a client recently that was telling me about, last year having such issues regarding different things that were going on in school and getting called down to the principal's office on a weekly basis, if not sometimes daily basis. And this year started a new therapist, also starting physical therapy, which can help for ADHD in certain situations. Please inquire within, ask your local therapist. Don't just take my word for it. And seeing a huge difference this year in their child, which I found so interesting that, through physical therapy and switching to new behavioral therapists, things being different, all of a sudden they get one call that something happened on the bus. And the mother, first thing she says to the school is, for the past 4 months since school started, you didn't call me once to tell me how good my son has been. Like, you're only calling now when there's a complaint, maybe, and which was the case. Maybe, there's a grandfather dying in a hospital right now, and that's why there was one issue on the bus this year. But, how about the past couple of months? Look at the changes that have been made at home. Look at the things that we're doing different. And, how come you don't point that out to us? Why are you only calling me when there's bad things happen? Which I think as parents, the lesson we can learn from that is when we see our kids doing certain things good, even though we might think that's like, all right, that's good. But yeah, it is, because, today they got their socks in the laundry basket. They didn't throw it down next to it. So let's point that out, and I think the question of, okay, so how can we get our kids to clean up their room more, which is a question that comes up very, very often. I think it's about, okay, so they didn't do it today and they did it yesterday. Let me point that out. Or like, oh my gosh, the cleaning help put my sweatshirts in their room and they brought it to my room instead of stealing it or wearing it themselves. That's a big deal. And pointing that out and saying something to them. And I think that goes a very long way when we have that open communication, when we talk to our kids and we say things to them that, like, oh yeah, I did do that. I did bring you that sweatshirt. You're welcome. And that goes such a long way regarding how we're going to have that healthy relationship with our child. There are so many things, Reena, that I could continue talking to you about. I have one more question before we go into rapid fire questions over here, and I'm going to open up to some of the readers here. There are so many different mentors out there when it comes to uh, the psychology world and things that we can learn from. And one a mentor of mine that I've learned a lot from, and I know you've commented on him. I want you to talk about it for a minute if you can. Is Gabor Mate, who has so much to offer to the psychology world, to the trauma world, to the parenting world. And I'm sort of curious. You said that you would like to interview him. Just based on recent comments, and I'm going to let everyone that listens to this podcast listen to what he had to say recently on the whole Israeli Palestine and how he goes about doing it. But I'm curious to hear from you when you talk about that concept of wanting to interview him, and that's the way you sort of will help process what he said recently. Can you explain to me how you were able to come to the place of being curious and not judgmental when it comes to someone saying something that might not be of the same opinion of you? And again, I implore everyone that's listening to this to check it out online. Maybe we'll even post it if I'm allowed to in the show notes here of what Gabor Mate said regarding the conflict and how he views it. But hearing from you, Reena, regarding when someone says something that might not be of the same opinion of you, but yet your response is to want to speak to them as opposed to have an opinion of them. Can you talk a little bit about that and how that's something that you played out within yourself and how that could be playing out as something as a parent?
Wow, that's such a tough question. And, there are family members even that agree with Gabor Mate's position on Israel. And, this can divide families where if you don't stay curious and you don't ask about someone's experiences or why they feel that way, then it's just going to be avoidance and it can lead to estrangement. So, the reason I would want to have a conversation and the reason I still have not unfollowed is because he has a significant following. So, he's obviously making sense to some people. And he does affiliate with being Jewish and talk about the Holocaust and that being an important piece of his life. So I'm trying to figure out, how does he come to these conclusions? I truthfully don't understand how he came to these conclusions. So it's me
And as a parent, and how does that
yeah,
work when your child does something that, forget about don't like, but you vehemently disagree with regarding
yeah.
their decision? How do you have the same mentality and mindset?
yeah, it's more of like trying to figure out why they're thinking that way. It's having to like be quiet and have them like restate it multiple ways so you can find something in what they're saying to relate to.
I love that.
Finding common ground, finding likeness, finding some way that you can like be a brother and sister. And you know, like, we are brother and sister, we come from the same people, like, there's gotta be somewhere we can relate here, I just need to find that. Because right now, I'm like, I don't understand at all where you're coming from. So that's how I try to approach it, and yes, this does relate to parenting too. Sometimes your kids do things and you're like, "I have no idea what you were thinking in doing that." Please, like, say it in 3 different ways of what you were thinking when you did that. Help me, like, see where you're coming from.
Help me comprehend, or
Yeah,
As Jerry Maguire might say, "Help me help you," right? In that
exactly,
sense.
that's totally what it is. I've had this situation even, you know, with the school that we had our kids at, where I'm like, "You started this school from 3 years old, you're supposed to be totally brainwashed. Why are you not accepting this program? Why are you rebelling?" You're making me not wanna be there either. What is wrong here? Is it the teacher? Is it the approach? Is it everyone?
Right?
Yeah, so you gotta dig deeper, and you gotta
And
just let them talk.
ask the questions. Just keep on asking questions. And I think that's how we get to be the best version of ourselves as individuals, partners, and like we talk about here, parenting. And I think there's so many more things, and hopefully when we get a chance to follow, because I still have a list of about 8 or 9 questions I didn't get a chance to talk to you about today. So, as I sort of wrap it up for today, I have a few rapid fire questions over here. I'm just going to throw it at you. If you could think of a song or a movie that has made you cry, what would that be?
Oh my gosh, I'm such a sap because I grew up in the '80s. It's definitely Beaches.
Beaches. Okay.
Every time. The Wind Beneath My Wings, that does it.
Okay. Um, is there a book or a podcast other than your own, or maybe a certain person that people can get more information that you would recommend based on our conversation today that you would recommend people read or find?
Well, the book that I just started reading that was referred to me by a listener of mine was The Empowered Wife by Laura Doyle. She talks about the importance of self-care in marriage. And then podcast, I'm gonna give a shout out to Matt Drinkon of the Eternal Optimist podcast. I think he really does his research well and he values parenting and fatherhood, and he is a front row dad, and he interviews a lot of other dads that also value that. I think he does a really good job when I need, like, a motivator or, like, a pick me up, I listen to that.
Oh, it's really awesome. And we're going to post links for both the book and the podcast. I think that is really helpful and also original, both things that have not been said on this podcast yet. So thank you for that. My last question for you, Rena, as we wrap it up over here. If you could think of a everyday mundane superpower that you can have as a mom that would be helping with parenting, what would that be and why?
Mind reading. That would be so helpful because, again, my kids just a lot of times think differently than I do, and it'd be nice to have just a little heads up what's going
Mm,
through their head before I need like a head start sometimes.
you said that answer very, very fast. So you've obviously thought about this before, but well, Rita, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today. Thank you so, so much. Before we end over here, can you tell listeners where they can find more of you and your podcast?
Well, I did listen to your podcast before. That's why I knew that question was coming, and I think that podcasters who wanna go on other people's shows should do that. And everybody that's listening to this should leave you a 5-star review and give you feedback on this episode with further questions that they may have in regards to this topic. How they can find me, bettercalldaddy.com or Reena Friedman Watts on pretty much every platform.
Amazing. Thank you so, so much for joining us today, Rena.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey again. I hope you were able to learn as much as I did today. Thank you so much for staying to the end and listening to the entire interview. Please feel free to leave a comment wherever you listen to this podcast. All comments will be read weekly, and we appreciate all feedback and ideas. If you have an idea for a guest or a specific topic, please feel free to share. Additionally, you can contact us at parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's parentingiseasypodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for joining today, and remember, parenting is a journey. Don't forget to enjoy it. The goal is to be a little better today than yesterday, and hopefully better tomorrow than we were today.